What's going on? Before we jump in, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss another video. I also have a big announcement. My wife and I have recently launched our own apparel line, Irony and Ink. My wife is a tattoo artist of 15 years, and all designs and patterns are made by her. The brand is a mix of edgy and gamer aesthetics, which is something we found somewhat lacking in the market. And right now, you can get 25% off your first order, as well as free shipping on orders over $100. Now to the matter at hand. The reason why you're here. We're going to be going over making your own armor, item, and clothing customization system. This tutorial will focus specifically on changes which the player may have control over, such as dyeing and staining their attire, as well as environmental effects such as wear and weathering. This system can be as simple or complex as you want it to be, and there's a lot of flexibility within it. This tutorial will be split into two parts. The first one being creating a system for custom attire, and the second will be retroactively augmenting existing or bought and downloaded assets you might have currently to ensure that none of your items go unnoticed. So let's dive right in. We're going to be looking at medieval type of armor in this case, and so just gathering a few different references. So first and foremost, you want to first understand type of armor you want. And so here we have medieval style armor, sure, but is it supposed to be more realistic? Is it supposed to be more fantasy? So R for realistic or fantasy. And that's going to kind of change the approach in which you're going to go about it. So for example, some realistic type armor like here, we see it's really just kind of monotone, right? So we have this right here, and it's sort of one note, right? Which is fine, and there's plenty of detail here, but it's pretty much just one shiny steel. And so for this, where we want to allow characters to customize their armor and their colors, we want to provide them more than just one option, right? More than just, what's the one color you want for your armor. Even if you allow them to sort of mix and match, maybe you can change, the breastplate is like 1, and then this is 2, 3, 4, 5, we have 6 pieces, whatever, 7 to change the color on. Ultimately, we want to give them more control, at least in this case, to control the look of their specific armor, right? And so something like this for what we're going for might not necessarily be the aesthetic. So the planning phase is great because it's going to allow you to also not only choose how you're going to go about creating your customization system, but also how you're going to plan your assets, which is very, very important. And even if you are not making your assets, let's say you're not a character artist, let's say you don't have a character artist on staff, and you're going to be sourcing assets. So this might be something that you keep in mind when looking at assets is like what are the layers of complexity to it. And so, for example, when we have something like this here, we see we have 1, and then we have all the filigree information, that's 2. We also have the chainmail down here, which is 3. And then, maybe we even allow for this sort of separated colored piece right here to be up to like 4. So you also want to figure out how many layers. So another question you want to ask yourself for the what are the layers? How many are you going for? The more layers you're going to have, the more complex, of course, the armor, the whole customization system is going to be. Whereas something like this, for example, we have something like for the steel is 1, for the filigree information, that's 2, for the chainmail, that's 3, and for the cloth, that's 4 or 5, whereas this one is kind of two-tone, so maybe you allow for that. And so you can have up to 5, maybe even just round it up and say 6 potential different avenues for customizing your armors. And of course, you can always set it up to where different types of armors have, different amounts of layers and things like that. However, it's important to, 1, understand the process, understand the assets you're going to be creating, and also understanding the process you're going to be using. So for this process, we're going to be using channel packed masks. So why is that important? This is important because channel packed means that we're going to be creating masks in the red, green, and blue channel. Now, so this means that we're going to want at least three, one, two, three, we want at least 3 layers in our material here. Now, is that mandatory? Do you always need 3? No. However, to get the most bang for your buck here, we are going to be looking to at least using 3 layers as a baseline. And you can always add more. You can do it in multiple different ways. You can sort of combine red, green, blue, green, red, blue, and ultimately make 6 layers if you want to pack it all into one. For what we're doing, we're actually going to create 2 separate RGBs. One is going to be for the armors, and one that's going to be for the cloth. And we'll explain why when we get there. And so when it comes to planning, this is the first sort of step with the planning for the armor. So what is it? Is it going to be more realistic? Is it going to be more fantasy? And how many layers? And then also, of course, gathering reference for what you want it to look like. The second one is going to be, and this is just a small sort of reference gather here, but getting different reference for different types of, in this case, weathering effects. So we're going to allow the player to have control over the color, over the stains and stuff like that. And we're also going to have a separate system, and this is something that we're actually doing in the game I'm developing, which is why I'm showcasing this, is what we have also is a overtime wear system, where the more you use something, if you're wearing armor when you're out in rain and in harsh weather conditions, stuff like that, it's going to start to degrade the armor, and that's going to have visual implications. And so for that, again, also figuring out what exactly do you want that to be. Part of that is taking inspiration from real world scenarios such as this, such as, real rust, real wear, real, torn cloth and stuff like that. The other part is also just art aesthetic, right? So that goes into the art direction for your game. So it doesn't have to be photoreal, it just has to be believable in the context of what you're going for. And so in our case, we're going to be using rust, weather, and tear. And it's deliberately 3 layers. 3 layers. And it's deliberately 3 layers because of the channel packed masks. So this all feeds into each other, right? So we're creating channel packed masks. And so part of that is for the player customization. The other part is the environmental customization. And so you figure we have 3 layers. So what are the 3 important layers of weathering environmental sort of effects we want on our armor primarily? So that's going to be rust, weather, and tearing, which in our case, for our game, procs based on different sorts of conditions and yeah, what have you. The other one that you might want to add also are scratches, but we'll get there. So this would be the sort of start of your planning phase. Obviously, if you want to gather more reference, feel free. If you want to, go a bit deeper into your planning process, go right ahead. For the sake of this video though, we're going to leave it here for the planning phase. So for context, this is the armor that we're going to be looking at. This is currently in Unreal Engine. We're going to swap over to Substance Painter in a second to do the masks. But this is currently what it looks like. This is in our little look dev scene that we use. And if we start increasing some of these, we can see the scratches, you can see rust buildup, we could see discoloration buildup, and then opacity, which the opacity starts sort of fraying up the edges here, so like so. And so this is what we're going to be developing here, is a system akin to this. So we go back over to Substance Painter, and what I like to do first within Substance Painter is actually create the basis for the materials. So we're going to be creating masks, but instead of just throwing on, RGB colors and then calling it a day, I like to actually visualize what that's going to look like. So I'll actually add the different layers, basically create the material that I'm picturing for it. And I'll create that material here. And so by default with this chest plate, this is the actual geometry of it. And then adding the different details within Substance Painter as normal maps to, just add more detail without adding any more geometry. So when you have your material, and we're looking at this, we're going to split it up into its layers that we were talking about earlier during the planning phase. And so we'll take a look at this, and then we'll take a look at one of the leather parts as well. And so what you're going to do, here, I'll just go ahead and get rid of this. So what you're going to want to do is just duplicate that. And remember, we're using the RGB channels. And so what you're going to do is that base layer, we're going to come in here, and we're going to just change that base color to a solid red. And make sure, go to RGB and make sure that it's set to 1. All the others are set to 0. That's very important. And so that's red. And then we're going to go over to the gold, and we're going to change the golds to green in this case. Because remember, we're creating two different systems of layering. One, which the player can actually dye and change the color and really make the armor their own, and the other for weathering sort of effects. So this one right now is going to be what the player is going to interact with. And so anything that's gold, we're just going to turn absolutely green. And then within this system, there is a leather. So the leather will be blue. And so the way in which I have my system set up, because all of my armors have the main color, it has some sort of accent detail, and it has some sort of leathery or fabric bit to it. So for me, red is always going to be just the base metal. Green for me is going to be the accent metal. So in this case, the gold details. And then the B channel is going to be the leather or fabric color. And then go into this leather. Again, just duplicate that. And then just go down to that leather base color. And we're just going to make this completely blue. Like so. So once you have your material set up, these are the layers for the player interaction, for the dyeing and staining system. And then for the weathering system, we're going to create our own. So I usually create my own smart material for these. And for this, we will create this from scratch here. So I'm going to, right here, there's a mask just so I don't actually, do this to the leather here. But for this, we're going to add a new fill layer. So go in here and, we'll just get rid of this right now. And for this one, for the red channel, we will use this one for rust. And all we need is the color. One thing I like to do also is I like to just make one and just make this flat black. So I'll just turn the roughness all the way up, and I'll make this black and just put this under here. Okay, and so now this rust, we're going to make it completely red. So make sure this is at 1, make sure green and blue are at 0. And then from here, we're just going to right click, add a black mask. And for this specific mask, you can really build it however you'd like. If we're talking about rust, there are a few options already in Substance Painter under smart masks. And there's one called surface rust. So you can try this out. You can go through and try any of these out. You don't have to, make custom mask this and that for absolutely everything. Sometimes just using what's there just works. And if it's going to save you time, I mean, why wouldn't you? So here we have this mask, and it's looking good. It's looking like rust. And if we pull up our PureRef and we look at the rust, look at the discoloration. So this is, again, comes down to how do you want to sort of art direct this. So when you're looking at this, for example, there's this kind of rust that's more like a general sort of discoloration. And there's this kind of rust, so where it's more sort of cut off. So this is like, we call this type 2, and this is type 1. So this can come down to just how do you want to arc direct this? How do you want it to be? So again, like if you're creating like a fantasy world, you're not creating a real world simulator type thing, you know, you can have your own artistic liberties with things, and don't be afraid to really try that as well. And so if we can go in here and increase it. One thing I like to do also, by the way, is I will err on the side of making it more intense than I might end up using. Just because if you make it too subtle, then you might have to crank that value up a bit too much. And what you want to do is set up a system in such a way that you can have it go from 0 to 1, right? And so if it's too subtle, then you might have to end up doing a bit of math where it's like, well, on this piece, it's actually, I have to actually plug it into a multiply and like multiply it by like 5 because I didn't do it right. So, so again, always just err on the side of going a bit too much sometimes is a bit easier in this specific case. And so we're gonna do that. And so for this rust, we'll kind of leave it as is for right now. And then we'll add a new fill layer here, and we will make this blue, or green rather. And the green is going to be the just sort of discoloration. So when I'm talking about discoloration, when I'm thinking of the rust, I'm thinking of the rust being something really strong and prominent. In my case, something more akin to this type 2 rust right here. And the discoloration, I want to sort of happen before the rust in this case. And for that, I'm going to use this sort of idea. So in my case, I'm using both type 1 and type 2 in slightly different ways. So the rust is like, if you really don't take care of your armor, it's going to rust and it's going to become really strong. So in that case, actually, I'm going to increase this contrast even further, like so. And maybe decrease the balance a little bit, okay? And then for this green channel, for this sort of wear, what we can do is first name it discoloration, and right click, add a black mask, and we could try this surface wear. And these masks by default might not always work out. And so, you know, just play around with things. Even if it does look good, sometimes just throw a different mask in it just to see what it looks like. And yeah, so just looking at this. One thing also, if you have these sorts of details and maybe you want to mask these details, you could just mask it with an anchor point. So we have this, and now we're going to add another one, which is going to be edge wear. So we do this, and this will be edge wear. And we will make this blue, entirely blue. And for this, just grab one of these masks, like so. And same thing, we can reference these details that we added here so that they get calculated in. And then we can change this mask around if we want. So we can go in here, we can change the balance a little bit, like so. And then this one, what I like to do, so what I advise doing is really fine tuning this on like one piece. And then what you can do is you can just group this and then name it. I usually, because I tend to, on various projects I work on, I tend to make a lot of smart materials because I tend to do a lot of texture work. And so for me, I tend to use the abbreviation. So like our game is Hidden Empire, so HE _, and I'll call this like armor mask, armor wear mask. I already have one, so I'm not going to go through the full steps, but you just want to create a folder and then right click and then create a smart material. And then once you have that done, then you can go over to your smart materials and you can grab this armor mask and you can just drag and drop it onto the various items that you have. And so that's what I tend to do, so I don't find myself like remaking things over and over and over again. But yeah, so that's one way to go about it. So now we have two channel pack masks. We have one that's going to be for the wearer, and we have one that's going to be for the player to choose. And if you are doing something where you're going to be creating holes, let's say, so for something like this piece, what you want to first do, and you could do this even after you've set up your project in Substance Painter, is you want to make sure that you click on this, go to shader settings, and you want to make sure that you are in alpha with alpha blending. So this one is PBR metal rough with alpha blending. And then you want to go ahead and go to this texture set settings, click on this plus, and I currently have it already here, but if you don't have, opacity isn't in there by default. And so you'll see it in here, and you're just gonna add opacity, and it will add that right here. And then once you do, and you have your material set up, then what we can do is start creating the masks for it. And in this case, it's going to be very similar. So we're going to do the same thing. So we're going to duplicate this. So this material is actually from a really good pack that I got from ArtStation, and I'll link that pack actually down in the description down below. But in this case, we want to, of course, first plan and know what we want to have change colors. So in this case, we are going to be, of course, having the leather is just going to be one, the stitching will be another, and the chainmail will be another. So the leather all make red. For the channel mask, the stitching will make green, and the chainmail we will make blue. And so in this way, when the player is playing the game and they're looking at this specific item, those are the three colors in which they'll be able to change. And so in this case here, you just want to find the base color here. So, just turn things off and on and go in here, change this to full red. So in this case, I used a paint layer to do this, which I don't really advise. So not a problem. We're just going to right click, add anchor point, and we'll just have call this stitch here, and we'll just make this green so we can make sure that we are getting complete control, like so. And then we will just add a mask, and then we'll just fill it with that anchor point, like so. And then after this, we just find that chainmail, iron chainmail, and we're just gonna turn these colors to blue, right? And so now we have the masks in which the player is going to interact with. Now let's create the weathering mask. So for the leather, we're not gonna add rust, we're going to add other things. So in here, I have my own smart material I made for it, which looks kind of crazy here. But this is what we have here, and we're going to remake this. So go ahead, add a new one. Again, I like to make a black background one, like so. And you can turn roughness off or on, doesn't really matter, to be honest, because we're not using the roughness channel. If you do this though, and you don't like the idea that you can't see any of its curves or anything, you could just keep your roughness on so you can actually see a bit of it, because again, we're just going to be using the color channel. So here we're going to red, and same thing. So click on red, 1, 0. I think by default, again, by the way, this is set to like HSV, I'm pretty sure. So just make sure, or if you're looking at this, like how did he get to here, just make sure you're under RGB. And once we have that, we can add a black mask. And in this case, we're going to do some discoloration. You can use the smart masks here. You can also build your own masks. We'll do all that in a separate video. For right now, we'll make this part sort of as easy as possible. And so here, let's go ahead and look at some of these. Let's just go with surface wear one more time. And we'll just increase this. Maybe decrease it a little bit. And for this one, I want to reference that chainmail because we don't want the chainmail being in there, so we want to mask that out. And you can mask it out in a few ways. You could, one, do it this way, where you're using the micro detail sort of workflow here. And you can do that. And sometimes if this doesn't work, you can also just mask it with a fill layer. And so we could do this, and we can just adjust the levels here. And we'll just do that. And then we'll set this to multiply. And so this way now we have some sort of discoloration noise going on here. And then for green, we'll have green be edge wear. And again, you don't have to follow this exactly. You could have the masks be, whatever you want them to be. But in this case, we're going to do red as discoloration, green as edge wear. So we'll do that. And in this case, I'll go ahead and grab this mask right here. And specifically, this is going to be edge wear for the leather. So we don't want it, again, affecting the chainmail. So I'm just going to copy and paste that. The other thing we can do is we can come in here and we can find this edge in this case. So we can go over here to this edge leather. We have the edge. And then lastly, we can do the opacity. So come in here. And what I usually do first is I will actually use the opacity. So first let's make the blue 1, 0, 0, like so. And then I want to actually visualize the opacity. So we're going to end up turning the opacity off and just using the color. But for right now, we will do both. So come in here and we'll call this, just call it opacity, and add a black mask. And we can first try this ground dirt and see what it does. And we can see that it is kind of doing something, but it's not really working like how fabric would, right? It's not really cutting it out like how it should. I mean, for starters, if we go into the opacity mask, there's still, right now it's just kind of doing this, right? So instead, in this case, we are going to do something a little more custom. So what we're going to do is we are going to grab a generator and we'll grab a position like so. Increase the contrast, and we'll just change that balance like so. Okay, can increase that contrast. Okay, and then from here, what we can do is we could really honestly do many things, but in here we're going to add a fill. Going to go to grunge, and I'm just going to grab one of these. And for this one, I will change it to triplanar and just increase that tiling a little bit. And just move it around until I find a good position. Increase the contrast, the balance. we're going to do is actually make this mask a little bigger than we might want. So something like that. Okay. And then what we'll do is we'll take this paint tool here and we'll just paint out some of this like so. And then additionally, what you can do is add another paint layer and just keep it at normal, and then paint this in. So for me, I want the bottom to get completely worn out, like so. So now we have a mask that's looking like this, and we can always, make it a bit better. We can mask out the chains. And paint some more bits out, but for now we're going to leave it as is. And then once you're done with this, then again we just need to group this together and then call us whatever your project is, and then fabric mask. And then just one by one, you just export this, textures, and I usually just export the color when it comes to this. And you're going to want to make sure to export the, the color, the metallic, normal. If you're using emissive, I guess, export emissive. If you're not, then you don't need it. And then for the opacity, make sure to also turn opacity off and just export the color for this. And then you're going to do that once for the fabric. You're going to come in here, export textures, this. You're going to put it somewhere, and then you're going to export it again. So you'll end up turning this one off. And using this, then you'll end up going here, export textures. Now, it is important to make sure that you either A, rename the first set that you export, or B, just put it in a separate folder. I usually just put it in a separate folder. Otherwise, what will happen is these files will overwrite each other. And so once you get those all exported, let's actually jump into Unreal Engine finally. So let's go ahead and do this from scratch here. So I'm going to duplicate this chess piece here, move it over, and come in here, and I'm going to create a new folder, and I'll just call this one tutorial for the sake of this. And let's go ahead and create a new material. So we'll call this armor system, armor wear system, whatever you might want to call it. I'm just going to call it armor system. And let's go ahead and open this. So we're in here, and what we want to do first is bring in our masks. So I'm going to go ahead and find so I'm going to grab the masks we created. So for the chest plate, this is what that looks like. If I open this, we have the red channel right here, we have the green channel, and we have the blue channel. Now you will notice that the mask is not completely black and white, which is actually good. It's actually what we want, because we want to have a little bit of influence, right? We don't want to just have like our armor be one solid color with just some roughness breakup. We want to still give the illusion that there's a depth to the actual color, to the actual armor here, which is why we're not doing just, flat color. So what we're going to do here is we have our masks, we have our ORM, we have our normal. And so what we're going to do is use a make material attribute. And what we're going to do is for this, we could just plug these in. You have your ambient occlusion, you have your roughness, your metallic. One thing you can do, depending, is I like to add, put this into a power and multiply. So I'll call this roughness power. I'll leave it at like a value of 1. And then plug that into a multiply. And we'll just call this roughness intensity, like so. And you can do the same thing for metallic. I'm just gonna plug metallic in like this. Normal map, same thing. You could plug this into like a flat normal if you want control, and plug this into a 1 minus. And we'll name this normal intensity. If you're new to Unreal Engine and you're wondering, how do I get this? You just press S as in scalar and left click, and you get a scalar parameter here. And plug that into the normal map. And so this is where the magic is going to happen. And it's actually pretty straightforward. So what we want to do is, again, red was our rust, green was our discoloration, and blue was our edge wear. I know that's how we did it in the tutorial. Let me make sure that's how I did it here. One thing that can happen is you can get confused, as I did, and you can mistake the ORM for the color data map. So make sure to double check and do that. Okay. All right, yeah, so this is the base color, the trim, and then the fabric. And that's how it's going to be basically for everything. So first I'm going to convert this to a parameter, and we'll call this color mask. And then what we're going to do is I like to plug all this into a power, like so. And then we'll call this base color. I know the base color is like a silvery color, so I'm just going to make like a gray. And then just plug these in together like so. And then same thing here. Trim color, plug this into another multiply. And then the fabric color. So the trim color, we know it's going to be like a gold, so we'll just do something like this for right now. And then the fabric is, in this case, since it's leather, it's going to be some sort of brown, so we'll just make it a little bit darker like this. Another multiply, like so. So far so good, right? We're not doing anything too crazy. If you've built shaders in Unreal Engine before, this doesn't look, like anything, beyond reasonable expectation here. So we got this, we got that, and then all we need to do is just start adding these together. You can also build this with lerps as well if you feel more comfortable using lerps. And here, plug this into base color. And for right now, let's go ahead and test this. So I'm going to use material attributes, hit apply, and I'll just create a material instance here and put this on this. And so far so good. We need to name these and organize the groups a bit, but just right out the gate, we can see that we already just very quickly, very easily, we're able to create the color picking system for the player here. So you can, however you build the system, however you want it, now you suddenly have this. We have the base color, we have the fabric, so we come down over here, take a look at it. and we can make the fabric whatever color, and the trim color, we go, I guess we're going Christmas here, and we can make it red and green. So you could do all sorts of combinations here. Obviously you can, really make this however you want. And let's go ahead and bring this back to something reasonable here for a minute. But yeah, so that quickly, we were able to create this sort of system here. We're now, whether it's, even if this isn't for a player customization system, maybe this is all for internal use, still this allows for a lot more art direction in real time in the engine. You don't have to keep sending the assets out and, waiting for the artist to send it back. You just make these adjustments on the fly. Maybe this is the armor. The art director says, well, we want the armor a bit darker. You don't have to send it back to Substance Painter to do a custom pass. Just send it back in and you just say, okay, is this dark enough or is this dark enough? And you can just make those changes like that. But in any case, that's this system. And now let's add the wear system. Before that, let's go ahead and actually organize this a little bit more. So we'll go ahead and we'll group this as color options, and we'll use this as color mask. You can also group these all together however you want. And I'll just call this normal, and I'll put both of these into a group called normal. This one ORM, and I'll just put all these ones into a group called ORM. The other thing you can do as well, if you want to have a bit more control with this, is you can also hold S, left click, and you can have controls for contrast. And we'll just put this in the same as color options here. I hit apply. And so now our material is looking a bit more organized here. Okay, so that's the color. Now let's create our wear system, which is going to be a little bit more involved, but we're still going to break it down in a simple way. So first and foremost, what we're going to do is we're going to break this and we're going to create a named reroute. So add named reroute, and we'll name this base layer. All right, and so what we're going to do is we are going to maybe tidy this up a little bit. And maybe add a comment, call this base layer. We'll make it black because we're cool like that. Move it over. All right. So next thing is I'm going to just grab a rust texture and just bring it in. And another, make material attributes. You can add as many sort of controllers as you want. For my original one, this is what it looks like. Again, very simple. I have the albedo controls, and then I have some tiling, and that's basically it here. And so I'm just gonna copy this and paste it. So we're just gonna use this, bring this over, bring this in like so. So we just have our rust texture, just generic rust texture. We have some tiling for it, and then we have some controls for it. And then for this, another named reroute, just to keep things organized, and we'll call this rust output, and this, and we'll make this red. Okay, now what we need to grab is our wear texture. So I'm gonna bring this in, and again, you can take a look at this and see what it looks like, double check it. So in this specific one, red is edge wear, green is rust, and blue is discoloration. And so we're gonna come in here and we're gonna grab this, and I'm going to add a power for all of these. So we'll do this. And then I will plug each of these into a multiply, like so, and like so. And then I'm also going to plug each of these into a saturate, because we are going to be using, plugging these into a lerp type blend. And we just want to make sure that this value doesn't go over 1. If you're ever working with masks and and you're using even like a black and white image for your mask, and you're like cranking up the values, and you see that you start to get like colored artifacts, like it might turn like blue or green or something, and you're wondering what the heck is going on with that. That's usually the fix for that. Usually is just putting in a saturate or a clamp, either one. If you're just going to be using 0 to 1, I just use a saturate, but they're basically the same thing. But that will 9 times out of 10, unless there's something crazy going on, that should fix that issue. For the multiplies here, so you can just use scalars and use, but what we're going to use for this case is just going to be a material parameter collection. There are other ways to go about it as well, but in this case, I'm just going to use a material parameter collection. So just go in here, right click, go to material parameter collection, MPC, and we'll call this global controller. And then in here, we're going to add a few of these. So this one will be edge wear or scratches. This one will be rust, and this one will be opacity, like so. And don't forget discoloration. And then what we can do is actually duplicate this, because this blue channel, depending on what it is, it's either going to be opacity or it's going to be, discoloration or whatever it might be, whatever you might have it as. And so for this one, we'll change this one to opacity. And then what we'll do is use a static switch parameter, true or false, and just plug this into a saturate. So you don't necessarily have to do this, but the reason why you might want to is so that you can keep it organized, keep your material organized. Because like once you change out the asset, the mask for the asset, then by default it might just like apply the opacity mask, but then at that point it might have the controls for discoloration instead, and it might get a bit confusing. So using a switch will keep things a bit more organized. And so now we just grab our material parameter collection here, and we're just going to do the one for rust. So now from here, what we can do is I'm going to add another named reroute. So this one will be edgeware, rust, discoloration, and named reroute, opacity. But in this case, this is how we're going to do it. Okay, so we got this. Now let's actually get this cranking. So what we're going to do is grab a blend, a matte layer blend, matte layer blend standard. And for this, we're going to use the base layer and then the top layer. So think of this in the levels of which you want this to be. So the first top layer, we want to probably be the discoloration actually, as discoloration is going to come before the rust. So we'll actually use that discoloration as the alpha here. The top material, we'll get that in a moment, and then we'll copy paste this. And then the alpha here will be the rust. Top material here will be the rust output. And then on top of all this will be the edgeware. edge where, okay. And then this one, static switch, whoops, sorry, we'll name reroute. Use, we'll call this discolor / opacity, like so. And we're gonna do discolor / opacity. And then we're going to plug this in. And then what we're gonna do for the edgeware and for the discoloration is really simple. So what we're gonna do is we're going to come in here, and for the edgeware for this top material, we can do a set material attribute, and we can base color, metallic, and a specular and a roughness. And then what we can do is just set this. So edgeware color, and we'll set this to like a bright silvery color. Edgeware metallic, set this to 1. The specular, I'll just leave it like 0.5. You don't even need to put in the specular really. And then this edgeware roughness, and we'll say like 0.3. And here, named reroute again, edgeware MA for material attributes, and comment this edgeware. And then for discoloration, we'll do something similar, except what we'll do is we'll grab a get material attribute. So the rust is going to be driven by, well, the rust. So discoloration, we want to sample it, but we want it to be a little bit different. So what we're going to do instead is from this, we're going to grab the rust output. So now we're grabbing the all the rust material attributes here. And what we're going to do is we're going to grab the set material attribute. And we really just want the base color and the roughness. So in here, what we can do is also grab this base color and roughness, plug the rest of these into here. And for the roughness, what we can do is we can add a scalar parameter. So discolor roughness. The roughness would probably be about the same, but we'll still just do this. So if we leave it at 1, that's basically going to just multiply itself by 1. So it's not really going to change anything. It's going to keep it the same. And then base color, what we can do, we can really do a lot. In this case, though, we're just going to run it through a desaturation. And we'll call this discolor desat. And we'll desaturate it by like 0.4. And then we will multiply this by a vector. So multiply this v, and we'll call this discolor color, like so. And we'll just leave it about here. Plug this in. Comment this discolor output. And we'll make this like blue. And then we'll plug this into another named reroute, discolor output. And so you see, instead of combining a bunch of materials together like how you would do in the material layer blend method, in this way, in order to drive variation, you don't need to create a whole bunch of materials. We really just need to sample one material and just change some of the parameters around to just look a little bit different, to really just look different enough. And then if we need more parameters to this, we can always add more parameters. And then from here, we're going to this top one, and we'll grab the discoloration output here, edge wear, material attribute. And I probably want to group these also. So and so now we have the discoloration here, and we can start changing some of these parameters. Discolor, we can go in here, we can change the contrast of this mask here. We can change the value of it as well. We can change the saturation of it. We could change really however we want to go about changing it. Desaturation, roughness, you can make it really shiny. And if you're running to an issue like this, where it's getting rid of the normal information, then what we can do is go back into this material, and then we could try the rust here. So start increasing that. Try the edge wear, increasing that. And so you start to build this layered sort of system, and then all you need to really do is just start playing with the parameters. And as you play with the settings, play with the parameters, start adjusting everything, then you'll get a better effect that starts looking something kind of like this. And so we got the rust here, discoloration, like so. And then of course the opacity. So if you don't want the opacity mask sort of baked in here as a switch, what you can do instead also is you can just get material attribute here, and you can just grab that opacity mask, and then you can set material attribute and plug this into here, set this as opacity mask, and then you can just multiply this like so. And then just grab that opacity from the mask earlier and plug it in here. And then of course for that you would want to change this to masked material. Now one thing you might want to do is actually duplicate this master material so that you have one that's masked and one that's opaque, so that not every material is masked. And if you do that, then you just delete the opacity and keep this as opaque. You basically leave it as is. And then after all that, then you'll have a system that looks like this, where you have complete control over the edge wear and scratches that accumulate on the cloth, on the armor. You have the rust, you have the discoloration that can happen both on the cloth and on the armor. And then you have the opacity. Thank you all for watching. In part 2, we'll be going over augmenting currently existing armors and cloth in your projects, and then circling back around in part 3 on how you would texture both armor and cloth in Substance Painter. Now, I hope you guys liked this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.